Sokaku Takeda was born October 10th, 1859 in Aizu, Fukushima, Japan. It is said that when Sokaku was young, he learned Onohaito Ryu and possibly Hozoen Ryu and maybe even Bojutsu from his father, Sokichi Takeda. Sokichi was believed to be a sumo ozeki, the highest rank in sumo at the time. I know some of you are thinking, what about Yokozuna? But that rank wasn't formally recognized until 1909. Sokaku also trained under well-known Jikishinkage Ryu sword master Kenkichi Sakakibara. He spent 2.5 years under Kenkichi. He wanted to continue his training under Shunzo Momonoi, so Kenkichi wrote him a letter of recommendation. Within the letter, Kenkichi asked Shunzo to help convince Takeda not to join Seigo Takamori's army. In case you're unsure who that is, Takamori was the leader of the samurai who rose up against the central government in the Satsuma Rebellion. Takeda spent about 10 years in Osaka at the Kyoshin Meichiyu Dojo of Shunzo Momonoi. Takeda was known to take long Muso Shugyo, or martial art travels, to hone his skills. Even on the way to Shunzo's, he is said to have stopped by several dojos along the way. In 1880, while practicing sojutsu or spear at Sakai Dojo in Kumamoto, Takeda was hit with the spear and lost his 2 front teeth. Another incident that occurred was when he got into a fight with several construction workers. This is an incident that Sokaku talked about on several occasions. He pulled out his sword and killed several of them, but barely survived himself. He was arrested and taken to trial, where he was found not guilty on the grounds of self-defense. In the 1970s and 80s, Sokaku's son, Tokimune Takeda, published articles on Aizu history and the life of Sokaku. They were published in the Daito Akibudo, a newsletter created for members of the Daitokan. Luckily, they were eventually published in Aiki News, as you can see here. The newsletters are worth reading, but there's one more story from them that I thought would be of interest. There were 3 bandits that were known for robbing and murdering travelers. Against the advice of the villagers, Takeda went down the road they were known to frequent. He ran into the outlaws and drew his sword, leaving 1 dead and 2 others crippled. Though these stories are good, and possibly true, if you're familiar with Japanese history, you may know about the Haito Edict, or sword abolishing edict, that happened March 28, 1876, when Takeda would have been around 16 years old. Though he may not have abided by the edict, or these stories happened when he was a youth, with all the training that Takeda endured, it's not improbable that these events may have actually taken place. Some of you may remember that Miyamoto Musashi killed Arima Kihei when he was only 13 years old, so fighting as a youth isn't out of the question. So it is said that the history of Daito Ryu goes back as far as the Minamoto clan in the 11th century, specifically Minamoto no Yoshimitsu, which for my samurai buffs out there, this is a very big name in samurai history. There's a long history that isn't necessary to get into as it's not verifiable and is likely embellished to give Daito Ryu a more prestigious reputation. This was a common practice in martial arts at a time when there was no internet. Takeda also claimed to have trained in the Aizu clan's martial art of Oshiki-uchi. This term translates something along the lines of honorable manner for indoors, which would have made it a system of etiquette and likely not a martial art, though some believe it may have had techniques for controlling someone while in a castle, as you're not allowed to carry longswords. After the Boshin War in 1868-69, the Aizu and many other domains fell, and the Takeda family lost their status. In 1898, Takeda had a discussion with Tonomo Seigo, also known as Hoshina Chikanori. He was the former chief counselor of the Aizu Han. Seigo told him that it was a new era in Japan and that teaching swordsmanship was no longer practical. He encouraged Takeda to teach jujitsu instead. Takeda took his advice. The earliest known record of Takeda teaching Daito Ryu is at a seminar held for 10 days in October of 1899. Through my studies in the history of Daito Ryu, I've always had a theory that in some way it was related to Asayama Ichiden Ryu. Though it's not verifiable, it only makes sense. We know that Takeda said he was taught martial arts of the Aizu clan. The problem is, the martial art he claims to have been taught, as we discussed before, is likely not a martial art. He learned kenjutsu and possibly sojutsu and bojutsu, sword, spear, and bow, from his father. So where did his jujitsu come from? From all the research I've done and everything I've been able to put together, as well as the historians I've talked to, I believe that there's a reasonable possibility that Daito Ryu is a descendant of, or at least borrowed techniques from Asayama Ichiden Ryu. While doing research for this video, I decided to call a good friend and get his opinion, and he sent me this from Ueno Takashi's 20th anniversary book. It reads, "There are many common techniques between Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu and Asayama Ichiden Ryu Taijutsu, both of which are said to be the official Ruha of the Aizu clan. Sokaku Takeda, who is believed to be the founder of Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu, was a very close relative to the Kurikochi family, and was in charge of teaching Aizu Han Bujutsu and Shin Muso Hayashizaki Ryu Iaijutsu. It seems that Takeda became the adopted son of the Kurikochi family, who is a renowned swordmaster of Aizu martial arts. Takeda was educated by Kurikochi and learned the martial arts of the Kurikochi family. The Tanaka family, who were the chief retainers of the Aizu Han, and the Kurikochi family were the families that passed down the lineage of Hayashizaki Ryu Iaijutsu. Therefore, it's not surprising that Asayama Ichiden Ryu was handed down to Sokaku Takeda. I assume that in the Kurokochi family, Sokaku Takeda also learned Asayama Ichiden Ryu Taijutsu, Bojutsu, and Tambojutsu, or short stick. These techniques are still in Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu. This is the reason that the same kata are contained in both lineages. However, I assume that the reason the Aizu Han's chief retainers, the Tanaka family and the Kurokochi family, didn't openly claim Asayama Ichiden Ryu as their lineage is that the art was widely practiced among gamblers in Joshu. That's the end of the quote for the book. But as for Takeda being an adopted member of the Kurokochi family, I've actually read this on several occasions, but never connected the dots until now. Though this doesn't necessarily verify my suspicion, it definitely gives credence to the idea. Sometimes the puzzle pieces just seem to fall together. Alright, let's move past my theories and back to what we can verify. Starting in 1899, we're able to track Sakako pretty well through his Imeroku or enrollment books and his Shareroku or payment ledgers. Though he couldn't read and write, he kept meticulous student records. The documents contain more than 2,000 pages. Something interesting about the enrollment books is that the first page of several of the enrollment books has Takeda listed as a student of Shibuya Toma in Onohaito Ryu, while other books have him listed as a student of Chikanori Hoshina. His title appears as Daito Ryu Jiu-Jitsu honbucho, or Director of Daito Ryu Jiu-Jitsu Headquarters. Others have him listed as Daito Ryu Jiu-Jitsu somucho, meaning Daito Ryu Jiu-Jitsu General Affairs Manager. We gotta wrap this up at some point, so let's move on. Sokaku taught at police academies, military schools, and private dojo across Japan. Over Takeda's lifetime, he taught some 30,000 students. Some of his more well-known students were Takuma Hiza, who learned directly from both Morihei Ueshiba and Sokaku Takeda while working for the Ashi newspaper in Osaka. He created the Takuma Kai and preserved both Takeda and Ueshiba's teachings through extensive photographic records. And then there's Tokimune Takeda. He's Sokaku's son and official successor. He organized and systemized Daito Ryu into a structured curriculum and established the Daito Ryu Akibudo headquarters in Hokkaido. And Kodo Horikawa, who founded the Kodokai in Hokkaido. He became famous for his highly refined, soft techniques. His student, Seigo Akamoto, went on to establish the Roppukai. And Morihei Ueshiba, the founder of Aikido. We could spend a lot of time on him, but we'll save that for another video. And then there's Yukiyoshi Sagawa, who started Daito Ryu at age 11 and continued until his death at 95 years old. Sokaku Takeda passed away April 5, 1943. After looking at all the evidence, or in some cases the lack thereof, I think I can safely say that Sokaku Takeda was the disseminator and the founder of Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu. Through the training with his father, and training with famous swordsmen like Kenkichi Sakabara and Shunzo Momonoi, as well as his Musho Shugyo or long trips for personal training, and whatever arts he may have done under the Aizu clan, he was able to create a martial art that has and will likely endure the test of time. These are my references and recommended reading for anyone who wants to learn more about the art and the history of Daito Ryu Aikijujutsu.